In this video, we're going to demonstrate the clear presence of the Godhead in Daniel 7. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date as new videos come out. And if you're interested in supporting this ministry, just go to justscripture.org and click on the support page. In part 2 of our chapter 7 study, we are going to finish off the remaining verses of Daniel's first set of visions. In part 1, we saw the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the sea that brought up 4 beasts. These beasts were identified with the same empires from Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue of multiple metals. The 4th beast, without question, corresponded to the legs, as both were described with iron, and that the 10 horns and the 10 toes both represented 10 concurrent ruling kings. But the added wrinkle to these 10 horns was that at some point 3 kings would be removed and a little horn would take their place, who is described speaking great things. But since we know that the next phase in God's plan is for the uncut stone to destroy the 4th empire, which ushers in God's everlasting kingdom on earth, that then we must think that the uncut stone is to correspond to something or someone, as the statue and the beast went hand in hand with one another. Verse 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spoke, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Quite a bit to unpack here. But we see it's one of those rare glimpses into heaven that we get to read about. I found 10 occurrences in the Bible where this takes place. Maybe there's more, and I just missed them. So if you know of any, just let me know in the comments section below. But it's interesting that there might be exactly 10, as 10 is the number that corresponds to God's testimony in the Bible. But on our chart, we see a character called the Ancient of Days, who passes judgment on the 11th horn and the 4th beast. So the story is developed further as what is to take place at the end of the 4th kingdom's rule. Chapter 2 described the uncut stone breaking into pieces the 4th kingdom and consuming all the prior ones as well. Chapter 7 adds to that story by saying that the 4th kingdom and its 11th king are said to be slain. The word slain is talking about someone being killed, and this is the same connotation that was used for Belshazzar being slain and the other early examples in Daniel. But Daniel goes on saying that not just the 4th beast is going to be slain, but also his body is to be destroyed. Now I know that this is obvious by now, but saying that his body is telling us that the 11th little horn is actually a human being, and male, mind you. And the last detail that Daniel saw was that the 11th king is going to be thrown into the burning flame. The burning flame grabs our attention because it sounds a lot like hell to the modern mind. Burning is the same rooted word from chapter 3 about the burning fiery furnace trial of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the flame is not the same word used for fire from chapter 3's episode. That word was used describing the Ancient of Days' throne. So apparently this is not your normal campfire to roast the beast on like a marshmallow. This flame is connected to something supernatural. The Aramaic word here corresponds to the Hebrew word aish that is used in Daniel one time, speaking of the glorious man with eyes as lamps of fire, signifying judgment. This word was also used for Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction and with Moses and the burning bush. But in this eschatological scene, the best equivalent is found in Isaiah 66 that says, For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, for their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be abhorrent unto all flesh. Now just FYI here, this is how Isaiah books ends, and which is probably not part of your typical feel-good sermon that you'll hear in church. But the verbiage here is so similar to that of Daniel 7:11, where the everlasting flame language and the slain that is being done. So, the slain that are thrown into the eternal fire would be those remaining kings, the little horn, and anyone else who aligns himself with the fourth beast. But did you notice that it was the Lord who is said to be doing the slaying? This detail can then be added to our chart that the Lord himself will be the one who slays and destroys the fourth beast. This tells us that the Lord is the uncut stone that destroys the statue. Now, with the fourth beast destroyed, verse 12 said that the other three beasts had their dominion taken away, but their lives were prolonged. The wording here might come across as if they continued on after the fourth beast, but that is not the case here. What Daniel is doing is contrasting them from the fourth beast, whom God personally destroys, whereas the others had their dominion taken away by another. But we know that ultimately God is the one who raises them up and removes their power according to his will. So God gave Nebuchadnezzar his Babylonian empire, then he gave that dominion over to the Medo-Persian Empire after 70 years, and in the next chapter, we are going to see how the Medo-Persian Empire loses its dominion over to the Greeks. But why say that their lives were prolonged for a season at a time? The conveyance is that as you go from one empire to the next, is that there are remnants of the prior kingdom that are absorbed and live on in the new. And this harmonizes with the description of the statue that is intact from head to toe until the uncut stone smashes it to pieces. Now, if you're wondering if I'm going to bridge all of this into the book of Revelation at some point, yes, I will do that. But it's not going to come until we get all the way through the book after chapter 12, because I don't want to, kind of put the cart before the horse, and also sometimes studies with Daniel kind of turn into, a book of Revelation study. So I want to keep the focus here and on its context and everything that Daniel was experiencing in his present tense. So let's go back and discuss Daniel's vision of the Ancient of Days. The first part is that Daniel sees multiple thrones being casted down, or really set up or put in place. We know that we have at least 2 thrones here in the scene because of the plural that's involved. But what is the text actually talking about here? Could it be possibly many more thrones? In verse 10, it said that 1,000,000 served God and 100 million stood before him. Now, granted that Daniel might not have, done a head count here, but it is likely that this is not an overestimate either. There's roughly 2 billion Christians today on earth expecting to be in heaven. So we know that God has made plenty of room for everyone to be present in his throne room. So we could think that there are many thrones surrounding the Ancient of Days throne, and we could think of, 3 clear examples of more than 2 thrones being present. Psalm 122 says that there are multiple thrones in the house of the Lord for judgment. Jesus told the 12 apostles that they will sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes. And in the book of Revelation, there are 24 elders surrounding the throne of God. So at minimum, there are 36 thrones that are or will surround the throne of God that will share in judgment. God doesn't need our help judging or ruling. True, but what does God need our help in for that matter? Does he need to have preachers, teachers, and evangelists to build his church? No. He could just jack us all into like Neo and load everything into our head if he really felt like it. But instead of treating us like robots, he chose to include us in his work as free will beings. This started back in the garden with Adam's assigned job as its gardener. And just before this, God just got done creating the whole universe and everything in it, so did he really need Adam to prune the bushes and pluck its fruit? Obviously not. But as our wise creator, he knows that work is a good thing for us to experience. We grow in our understanding of the world that he created, and our maturity grows in the process as well. And that's why it's important for fathers to include their children in their work, whether that's at the office, the field, or at home. The child grows in that process, but the real hidden gem in it is that it bonds the family closer together. So God includes us in his work because it allows us to learn from him and also creates a more intimate relationship between us and him. And part of that is that God has created many roles for us to serve in as well, because we're not all the same clone version of one another. And one of those rules is for at least the 12 apostles to share in the rule. They are likely granted these special seats because of the sacrifice and the unique service that they did for the Lord. And for believers in general, we are told by Paul that we will judge the world and even angels. And later he tells Timothy that we will even reign with Christ. So the real question to ponder is, if God's everlasting kingdom on earth and everything that is indicated by it is like, we're going to be living in Pleasantville, then what's the need for all these people judging and ruling over others? Now, the title Ancient of Days is only found here in Daniel 7. And as likely assumed, we are talking about God here. But instead of saying the God of heaven or the Most High God, like Daniel has done many times before this, he uses this unique title to express a couple of thoughts about God. First, in the general sense, it does talk about someone being old and advanced in age, which is why you often see God depicted as an old, white-bearded man. This in the ancient world was a sign of wisdom and someone to be venerated. And the other characteristic that Daniel is highlighting here is of God's eternality. The closest resembling verse to this is found in Isaiah 43:13 that says, "Before the day was, I am he." Other versions will say from ancient days or from eternity. So Daniel is telling us that God has the right to judge because he is the one who created everything, including you and me. The next bit of info that Daniel tells us is that God's garment is as white as snow and his hair was like pure wool. Daniel is not giving us specific details for us to go and draw a picture of God here. He is describing the holiness of God. So it's not just because God is the creator that he deserves the right to judge, but also because of his perfection in all regards. Next, his throne is described having fire coming from it, which, if you were to search for some pictures of this is probably the typical rendition that you would see. And God showing up in a flaming blaze of glory is not without precedent. We know how he appeared in the burning bush to Moses, then was in the pillar of fire that led the Israelites by night, and after that, he was on Mount Sinai speaking to the whole nation out of fire. Then he was in the tabernacle at night as the flame of fire, to all of which Moses then says that the Lord God is a consuming fire. The takeaway here is that God shows up in a flame of fire a lot of times. But did you notice that Daniel said the Lord's throne has wheels on it? This odd detail to us is actually described more thoroughly by Ezekiel in his vision of God that came 40 years before Daniel's. He spoke about cherubim with 4 faces facing in each direction, and with their legs being fused together as one, with the wheels being attached at the base of their hoofed feet. So Daniel is letting us know that he saw the same thing as Ezekiel, who at this point is an established prophet of God. And for those 100 million plus attendants, they are likely talking about angels here, as Moses described the Lord coming with 10,000 angels to give the Israelites the law. And in both descriptions, fire is included with this presence. So there is a consistent pattern being built here. You have God coming in fire, with thousands of angels. Just keep this in mind as we move forward. Verses 13 and 14 now. Then I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and the angels brought him before him. Now we have a second main character on the scene, who is called the or a Son of Man, with angels bringing him before the Ancient of Days. Verse 14. And there was given to him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Now, if you can't already tell how important these two verses are to the rest of the Bible, then you're in for a real treat here. First on our chart, we can add the Son of Man character with the Ancient of Days. And verse 14 said that the Son of Man was given an everlasting dominion that shall never be destroyed. This is the same language from chapter 2. But the special nugget here is that the God of heaven who sets up this kingdom is now giving its rulership to the Son of Man figure. So on the chart, we know that the Son of Man is the appointed ruler over God's kingdom, which really means that he's the anointed king of this everlasting kingdom. This tells us that these verses are a messianic prophecy that the Son of Man is the Messiah, aka Christ the King. Are you starting to see how important these verses are? The term Messiah simply means anointed one in Hebrew. But as the Old Testament was being translated into Greek, the term Christos was used in its place, where now we simply say Christ in English. Mashiach occurs 39 times in the Old Testament. Overwhelmingly, the use is in use to reference of that of the kings of Israel, with one exception, that being King Cyrus of Persia, found in Isaiah 45:1. Jewish history records that Cyrus was shown Isaiah's prophecy after conquering Babylon, to which this spurred him, allowing the exiles to return to Jerusalem and begin rebuilding the temple, as it is read in Ezra 1. There are two times that Mashiach is used in Daniel 9, but we are not going to define those until we get there and cover the text. Now, because Mashiach is used so many times in reference to the King of Israel, is that when prophecies speak about a future everlasting king, that this individual is called the Messianic King. But there's more layers to this. In 2 Samuel, God told David that there will always be a descendant of his sitting on the throne. So this Messianic King would need to be a descendant of David, or we could say a son of David. But it doesn't end here either, because in the Psalms there is a special messianic prophecy that we need to know, and that is Psalm 2 that says, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. But he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then he shall speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. And he says to them, Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion." So we have the Messianic King here in view. Now at verse 7. "I will declare the decree. Yahweh said unto me, Thou art my son. This day I have begotten thee." Do you see the new detail here? We just established that the Messianic King is the one in view. So let's just simply connect the dots now. The Messianic King is declared as Yahweh's son, or in other words, the Son of God, who is also a son of David, who is the Son of Man in Daniel 7. Now, if that wasn't cool enough for you, then I don't know what is. But guess what? There's still another wrinkle to add to this that we'll discuss here shortly. But before that, Maybe some of you are thinking that I'm reading too much into the text or craftily guiding and connecting dots that should not be connected. Fair enough. So let's quickly see how Jewish rabbis have interpreted this psalm over the centuries. In the Talmud, it says that our rabbis taught, the Holy One, blessed be He, will say to the Messiah, the Son of David. And then he goes on quoting Psalm 2, 7 through 8. Rabbi Jonathan from the 2nd century AD wrote that 3 persons were allowed to ask for something from God: Solomon, Ahaz, and the King Messiah. Then Rabbi Jonathan connects Psalm 2:8 to the Messianic King. And the famous Maimonides said, "The prophets and the saints have longed for the days of the Messiah, and great has been their desire towards him. For there will be with him the gathering together of the righteous, and the administration of good, and wisdom, and royal righteousness, with the abundance of his uprightness, and the spread of his wisdom, and his approach to God, as it is said." And then he connects God's Son from Psalm 2:7 with the Messiah. So you see, I haven't imposed any Christian worldview here. Yeah, but I didn't see them mention anything about the Son of Man from Daniel 7. True, but the context of Psalm 2 clearly binds the two together. We were told that God sets up the kingdom, then he gives it to the Son of Man. In verses 8 and 9 of Psalm 2, it says, "Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen Gentiles for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." In both scenes, the key figure is being given the Gentile nations from God with a kingdom that covers the earth. And the last verse in Psalm 2 mirrors 7:14 from Daniel in how we are to serve the Son. So we are obviously talking about one and the same person here. Now, because the Messiah is said to be both the Son of God and the Son of David, that this means that he will be both divine and human. Did you get any goosebumps there? No? Okay, let's move on to our next wrinkle then. Verse 13 said that the Son of Man came riding on the clouds of heaven. This riding on clouds language is all over the Old Testament. In Exodus, Yahweh led the Israelites in a cloud. He is also said to have descended upon Mount Sinai in a thick cloud, with additional language that says that he was upon the cloud as it came down. Then, after Solomon's temple was built, the Lord filled the temple with a cloud of his glory. In Psalm 18, it says that God rode upon a cherub with the wings of the wind that had thick clouds before him. This is very similar to the cherub language that is found in Ezekiel's vision here. And in Psalm 68:4, it flat out says that God is the one who rides on the clouds. Psalm 97 says that the Lord has clouds all around him with fire going before him, which is very similar to Daniel's vision of God's throne. Psalm 104 says that Yahweh makes the clouds his chariot. Isaiah prophesied against Egypt, saying that the Lord is coming and riding on a swift cloud. Ezekiel said that Yahweh's presence filled the temple with a thick cloud. And the prophet Nahum said that the Lord comes in judgment riding on clouds. So, in these 10 examples, they all declare that it is God who rides upon the clouds. The only exception to this in the Old Testament is Daniel 7:13, that said that the Son of Man came riding on the clouds. This means that the Messiah figure is not just both divine and man, but actually the God-man coming on clouds to save and rule his people. And not just that can be deduced here, because since both the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man are God, yet they are clearly distinct from one another, that Daniel has provided us with a clear example of the Godhead in heaven. To which every anti-Trinitarian starts saying,
no, 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 I refuse, no, no.
Now I know that every Unitarian out there is going to reject this interpretation, and that I'm the one who's forcing these two pieces together just to fit my view. Because the drummed up spook story that cult leaders tell their followers is that the doctrine of the Trinity was forced into the church by Constantine to appease his pagan citizens nearly 300 years after the time of Christ. This bogus narrative is something that I've teared down in my earlier videos on witnessing to Jehovah's Witnesses, so those are available to watch and share as needed. But what I just declared was that this belief in divine plurality is not a Christian invention, but is an understood concept that is rooted in Judaism. And I can prove that this was in the minds of Jews before the New Testament. Because in the 2nd century BC, the writer of 1st Enoch used the book of Daniel and wrote on the Son of Man, chapter 46, verses 1 through 3. And there I saw one who had a head of days, and his head was white like wool, and with him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man, and his face was full of graciousness, like one of the holy angels. And I asked the angel who went with me, and showed me all the hidden things concerning that Son of Man, who he was, and whence he was, and why he went with the head of days. So you can see how the writer here is pulling from Daniel 7. And he has questions specifically on who is the Son of Man, and even when did he come from. Moving down into chapter 48, verses 2 through 6. And at that hour that Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, and his name before the head of days. Yeah, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. These verses prove that the Son of Man was viewed as uncreated and eternal, thus he is God. The writer said that before creation, that the Son of Man was in the presence of the head of days. Only God can exist before creation. Now look at what the writer expected from the Son of Man in verses 4 through 6. He shall be a staff to the righteous, whereon to stay themselves and not fall. And he shall be the light of the Gentiles, and the hope of those who are of troubled heart. All who dwell on earth shall fall down and worship before him, and will praise and bless and celebrate with song the Lord of spirits. And for this reason hath he been chosen and hidden before him, before the creation of the world and from eternity past. Didn't that sound a lot like what we read in the New Testament? And the only point that I'm trying to make here is that these concepts of divine plurality with Yahweh and the eternality of the Son of Man are in the Jewish minds coming at minimum 100 years before Christianity. So I wasn't declaring 1st Enoch as scripture there, just simply pointing out what Jews were thinking and expecting when the Son of Man was to come. Now that we have the composite picture of who the Messiah is to be, is that I want to end this video by showing you that this is exactly who Jesus saw himself to be. As to being the son of David, 4 times you will see the New Testament writers pointing out that Jesus was a physical descendant of David. 4 other times you have people declaring Jesus to be the son of David in the messianic sense. And then at the end of Revelation, Jesus said, I am the root and offspring of David. As for the Son of God, Mark starts his gospel by simply declaring it. Satan, demons, and other people call Jesus the Son of God 50 times throughout the New Testament. And for Jesus himself, he said it 10 times, with crystal clear statements like in John 10:36 saying that he is the Son of God. And at his trial, Caiaphas the high priest put him under oath to answer the question if he is the Son of God, and Jesus answered, I am. But in spite of these examples, there was no more preferred self-identifying title that Jesus used than calling himself the Son of Man. 81 times Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man that are normally done in the third person. Nobody else in the Gospels or in the epistle letters ever calls Jesus this, which is why you will hear critics sometimes trying to attack the validity of the Gospels to undermine Jesus using this divine title for himself, because the only person to publicly call Jesus the Son of Man was Stephen in Acts 7:56, where he is stoned to death for saying it. And the final 2 times that it is used are found in the book of Revelation with the Apostle John's vision. Now, Jesus' most famous use of the Son of Man title was him saying that the foxes have holes and the birds of air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Basically, Jesus just told us that he is poor and possibly even homeless. Next, in Mark 2, when he healed the paralytic, it says, When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the paralytic, Son, thy sins be forgiven. When the scribes heard it, they said, Why does this man speak such blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? The scribes were correct in saying that, but Jesus lets them know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Jesus knew what this meant, and so did the scribes. Jesus just equated himself with God. And as we saw earlier, when Jesus was on trial, that he truthfully said that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, but he wasn't done giving his answer quite there. He finished saying, And you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Jesus declared that he is the second Yahweh figure from Psalm 110 and Daniel 7:13. So when Caiaphas heard Jesus saying this, that he was the rider on the clouds, he immediately tore his robe, called Jesus a blasphemer, and got the whole Sanhedrin to sentence him to death for making himself to be equal with God. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. But in the meantime, stay salty.